Hey everyone, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman, founder of FalcFans.com. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Scott Karasik, who helps cover the Falcons for the Falcoholic. We are back this week after a little 2-week hiatus, so we will catch up and we'll talk about the release of Rob as well as a bit about the upcoming Falcons. It's a flurry right now with lots of stuff happening, and free agency is about to start as of tomorrow at 4 p.m. And as usual, we'll answer all you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show. So, Scott, let's start off. Let's backtrack a little bit and talk about the departure of Roddy White. He was cut last week, and obviously he's been a long-time Falcon, all-time leading receiver. A lot of bitter feelings, I think, among the fan base in terms of his departure. Where did you fall on Roddy White's release?
It was needed. Probably where you fell on it. Like, love you, Roddy, but you're done.
Yeah, that's it's pretty blunt, but yeah, that's kind of how I felt about it. Yeah, I mean, I think Roddy played dick last year, and I was hoping that we would see him improve this past season because of some of the circumstances that surrounded the last season. He was dealing with a knee injury. Hopefully he was going to be a little bit healthier this year. He probably was. But Father Time is undefeated. And I think it's starting to catch up with Roddy. And I think just moving forward with the Falcons, trying to develop Justin Hardy. And, Roddy's going this way. Hardy potentially should be going this way. And it's just there's no real upside for the Falcons to keep going with Roddy on his declining path. So I think it was the right move for the Falcons. Hopefully they find a replacement this offseason that can be an upgrade at that position. I don't necessarily think, based off of where Roddy was last season, that should be too hard a task to do. But all things are easier said than done. So we'll see what happens. And I wish Roddy the best. He sounds like a guy who's going to try to play a couple more years. Maybe he winds up in Tampa Bay or wherever. And I hope for his sake that whoever signs him decides to play him in the slot, which is, I think, where his best fit is at this point in his career. And if they do that, then I think he can still be a productive, complimentary role player for some team. But, he's not going to be a 1,000-yard receiver for anybody. And if he is, I'll eat that plate of crow. But I don't think I'm going to be wrong about that.
I don't think so either. I mean, he was just done. And people are going to keep trying to tell me on Twitter, oh, no. Roddy still had it. No, he didn't. Watching the film, he wouldn't get open until 3-4 seconds into the play. It was just frustrating. And then the times that he was getting open later in the year, he wasn't getting open during his read window. So, yeah, he might have been open that first second and a half of the route, but he's the third read on the play, so he's not going to get the look because he's covered by the time he would have gotten the look. So it didn't make sense to keep Roddy White, especially at the money. Now, if Roddy White would have done a minimum contract, maybe, but even then, you can't keep Roddy White on the team and not start him with what his reputation is in Atlanta. You just can't. It wouldn't have gone over well. It would have gone over about as well as a fart in church. Just not good at all. It would have pissed a lot of people off. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So he was cut for cap savings, obviously. He was cut because he wasn't what he once was. The value just was not there. And the combination of the money that they're going to save from cutting Roddy and from cutting, I think, Devin Hester later on in this offseason, it makes a lot more sense to see. It makes a lot of sense to see someone like Travis Benjamin come in for that money. Make 5 this year, 6 the next year, and then in a couple of years, see a little bit bigger contract, like an $8-9 million from that point on. But I also am one of those people that thinks Travis Benjamin can be a lot like what Steve Smith was in Carolina. Guy was a deep threat. Guy could take a ball over the middle, get some yards after the catch. Guy who could take that 3-yard pass and turn it into a 9-yard pass when it was 3rd and 6. And again, no one, that's basically what Steve Smith was back in the day. Now, he's still similar to that now, but he's not close to what he once was. Also, Benjamin's a great returner, and I think Atlanta would be smart to get him as a return specialist. But that's about it there.
All right. Yeah, well said. You want to go to the scouting combine and bang that out pretty quick? I don't think we have a whole lot to say, so there's no reason to wait till later in the show, right?
No, not really. I mean, the thing about the combine is who didn't match up with their film. And for the most part, a lot of these guys matched up athletically with exactly what their film showed. Carson Wentz was athletic. Paxton Lynch was athletic. Jared Goff wasn't, pretty much what their film showed. At running back, Ezekiel Elliott, 4.47. That's about what film showed. The one that stood out to me was Keith Marshall. I knew he was fast. I didn't know he was 4.31 fast. But knee injuries will do that. If he can get his shit together, as far as injuries are concerned, I would love to have him in Atlanta for a 7th-round pick because I think he would be a massive upgrade over TJ Ward. Teron Ward, whatever. Neither one of them should play running back for Atlanta.
I don't think TJ would be that bad as a running back, but yeah.
I think he'd be pretty bad. Braxton Miller ran about what I thought he'd be. I actually thought he was going to be closer to a 4.6 guy. I liked his short area quickness a lot more than I liked his straight ahead speed. So the fact that he ran a 4.5, that was about what I was expecting. The 3-cone of 6.65, that's what I was expecting from him more than anybody else. The one that didn't do as well as I thought was Will Fuller. He shows a little bit more short area quickness on tape than what he showed at the combine. His route running sucks though. So, and then the other one was Michael Thomas. I thought he was a little bit more of a deep threat as far as his speed was concerned. I didn't realize he was only a 4.57 guy until the combine. It kind of stood off, but he's a long strider. So, and
yeah,
of course, George has got an athletic wide receiver again in Malcolm Mitchell, and Marquez North lit up the combine like I thought he would. I mean, there's like 2 guys that lit it up that I wasn't expecting, and one of them was Devon Kajuste out of Stanford, kind of an H-back type guy. Now, he's only like a 4.6 guy, but he runs a 6.49. He's got a 234-pound frame. I think if you use him similar to how the Falcons used Tammy, it'd be a good fit. And then Deronye Wilson was just awful.
Yeah, he tested way worse than I thought he would.
I thought he was going to be so much better than he was. Nick Vanette posted pretty solid numbers for a tight end. I was expecting that, though. I'm kind of pissed that Hunter Henry didn't even run. I don't know what the deal was there. I think he might have been a little injured, but even then, like, just run. You can always get better times later. And then the rest of it, like Austin Hooper, he was okay. The tight end class is underwhelming as a whole, athletically. The edge class is really underwhelming as a whole, outside of 2 of them. And I'll get there in a second. So the offensive tackle class, Tunsil, as always, was going to be athletic. He didn't test, but He looked good in the drills. Taylor Decker wound up looking good, but the two that shocked me were Jason Spriggs and Jack Conklin. Conklin was not expecting Conklin to test as well as he did.
Mm-hmm.
And then Joe Haig out of North Dakota State tested out really well. I wasn't expecting that. Now, named later on in the draft, who I would have a higher grade on if he wasn't injured all the damn time, is Tyler Johnstone out of Oregon. He's probably a second-round talent, but because he's always getting injured, I think I got a fifth on him or a sixth on him, something like that. But he's athletic as hell, and I just wish he would just stay healthy. And then Joe Thuney out of North Carolina State looked pretty good. The guy who I think fits, who I said before the combine was probably the most athletic guard in the draft, Connor McGovern, definitely tested that way. And at center, our boy Ryan Kelly out of Alabama literally tested almost exactly the same as Alex Mack, which I was pretty happy about because I really like Ryan Kelly. I think he'd be a good fit in the second round if the Falcons don't sign someone in the next day or so. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Nudge, nudge.
All right.
On the defensive line, this is where I was very shocked at how bad Joey Bosa did. I was expecting him to be a guy who met all three of my thresholds, didn't meet my explosion threshold of 215, just not very explosive off the line. He tested closer to Chris Long than anybody else. So I put him on the defensive line because I don't think he can play linebacker. Emmanuel Ogbah, on the other hand, tested amazingly.
Yeah.
His numbers are very similar to what Bud Dupree did. His three cone's not amazing. His shuttle's not amazing. But his 40 time, his 10 split, his ability off the line, I think if you put him in a 9 technique when you're pass rushing with him, he would just destroy people. And even then, he did test more agile than Dupree did. Outside of that, there's not another person that really met all three thresholds outside of, this is going to sound crazy, Jason Faneca out of Utah. My thresholds are 135, 125, and 215 on my three scores. He's 6'1", 271 and met all three. So he basically would compare to Dwight Freeney athletically.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's kind of a weird comparison, but it's what fits. And then Connor Woodchak from Boston College. He's your Geno Atkins, Grady Jarrett combine comparison there. And, yeah, Robert Nkemdiche looked solid at the combine. But his interviews are going to be fucking awful because there's issues there. Yeah. I don't want an Nkemdiche brother on this team at all.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the past show with the one we did with Charles. We talked quite a bit about that, and yeah, he's not going to be on the Falcons' radar.
Nope, not at all. Shaq Lawson tested amazingly. So, and Noah Spence didn't do horribly. He didn't meet my thresholds, but I would still draft him just because I like him. I think he's a good pass rusher. Lawson he did ridiculously well. Leonard Floyd did well in the 40. I'd like to see what his shuttle and cones come back at. Explosive-wise, he is the most explosive edge player in the draft, but I almost want to put him on I almost want to put him as a full-time linebacker just because I don't really trust him as an edge. And since we all know that the three cone's important, James Cowser out of Southern Utah had the fastest three cone time out of all the edge this year. And second was Shalik Calhoun out of Michigan State.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Calhoun didn't even run like a 5.040 and had like a really good three cone.
He had a 4.840, which for a defensive end edge player isn't that bad. Especially since he measured in basically John Abraham's size, 6'4", 250, 34-inch arms. Like, that's John Abraham's size. So you're not really going to want to play that guy at linebacker unless you absolutely have to. And personally, I would much rather just have him as an end. Like, if he came to Atlanta, I'd rather see him as the weak side end than as an actual sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'd rather see him as a weak side end than as the friggin' starting linebacker. I think he'd be much better off there. I mean, honestly, he didn't test much different than Noah Spence athletically.
Okay.
He's longer, he's taller, he's got a better frame for end if you want to draft a guy for end. Now, Darren Lee did really well as well. Really well. I was kind of shocked at how well Lee did. Because I was expecting him to do like 4.5, 5, 4.6. Have a good split, have a good shuttle, have a good cone. And he had all those, but I was not expecting him to run 4.43. I'd love to see him as a weak side linebacker for Atlanta. I don't want him as a middle linebacker. And then Reggie Ragland, I don't think he's a good fit in the scheme, and the combine pretty much put that out there. Outside of that, Nick Vigil out of Utah State was the one that shocked me out of all of them. He was just as fast as Deion Jones in pretty much every drill except for the 40. And if your linebacker is running 40 yards, he's either on special teams or your team fucked up somewhere. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate right there.
Yeah, your linebacker should not be running 40 yards down the field. Just going to put that out there. So if you ever get mad at someone for that happening, either it's a scheme issue or they just screwed up their assignment. At cornerback, I wasn't really looking at corners, but William Jackson from Houston really shocked me. And Devon Seymour out of Southern Cal shocked me pretty well with his times. Jalen Ramsey cemented his spot as a top 10 pick in this draft. I really like what he did. If he does fall to Atlanta at 17 and they don't take him, they're stupid.
That's probably a fair statement, but I'm pretty sure he'll be – I think he's a lock to go in the top 5.
Oh, yeah. I think he's Tyrann Mathieu with height and, like, true safety size. So, basically, Eric Berry.
Okay. That works.
Now that I think about it. And Darian Thompson, he doesn't have the best straight line speed, but I think he's a good fit. I think he's personally a good fit for the defense, but I could see where the Falcons would pass on him because he didn't test out well in the 3-cone.
Well, I think the interesting thing about Thompson, he was one of those guys that I read had his stomach issues. So we might be able to throw out his combine testing if he tests better at his pro day.
He can't test too much better at his pro day, though. Like, if he hits a 4.55 and a 1.59 split, that's what his field timing looks like anyway. So you're like, okay, that makes sense. You know, and if his shuttle is closer to a 4.1 than a 4.3, that's probably more what his field timing really looks like. Sean Davis out of Maryland basically tested like a corner, though, which for safety, that's what you want. And Miles Killebrew sucks. Like, up here, doesn't have any of it. He tested well at the combine, but I just don't think he has anything up there to do well. And then Justin Simmons out of Boston College, he was very shockingly good in the 3-cone and the shuttle. So he might be a short area quickness guy that the Falcons end up taking in the mid-rounds. Just for a name to throw out there, guys.
Okay.
And then my linebacker, my guy who should be playing linebacker but tested with the safeties, Tyvis Powell. I'd love to see him as a linebacker in the NFL. I'd love to see him gain 20 pounds. He's 6'3", 210. But if he was 6'3", 230, I think he'd be a great weak side linebacker. Probably could have speed down to a 4.6 from a 4.45. But, I mean, he's got the short area quickness, and he'd be a hammer in the middle. And then kickers and punters are kickers and punters. They can go suck it. I really don't care.
All right, well,
I
which
don't scout kickers or punters.
punters are people too.
You can't scout a punter. Like, you can't. I'm results oriented. Like, if you kicked a lot of field goals in college and you kicked a lot from like 50 plus, you could probably do it in the pros.
That's probably a fair statement.
You know, if you kicked a clutch field goal in a championship game, I'm pretty sure you can do it in the pros.
Unless you're Nate Katie. But yeah, I get what you're saying. All right, Scott, let's move on to the thing that everybody wants us to talk about. Let's talk about free agency. Now, obviously, we're in the midst of the legal tampering period. Moves can't be officially be made until tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. So, 18 hours, I guess, from where we are recording this live. I think a lot of people have been, you have people that are excited and disappointed because the Falcons aren't getting all these big splash signings, but they've been connected to a bunch of players. At wide receiver, we've seen them connected with Travis Benjamin and Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu. You talked a little bit about Benjamin earlier, but if the Falcons are going to land one of these three guys in the next few days, do you have a preference?
Receiver, I'd much rather have Travis Benjamin than any of the three. I think it's Benjamin and then Jones and then Sanu. Like, I would prefer to have Jones and Sanu, but for the money, I think Sanu's going to be $2 to $3 million, where I think Jones is going to be $5 to $6 million. You know where I'm going to side, being the cheap bastard that I am. I'd rather have Sanu for $2 to $3 million than Jones for $5 to $6. But that's just me.
Okay. Yeah, I think Jones is up here with Benjamin. I think that, to me, the thing about Jones, I think he's the player that a lot of people think Roddy White is. The biggest Roddy White supporters, that they still think Roddy White is that sort of possession receiver. I think that's what Marvin Jones is right now. So if the Falcons were looking for that type of player, I think they could find it in Marvin Jones, and I do think he's probably worth $5 or $6 million. But I'd rather see the Falcons get Travis Benjamin, just because I think he can bring a different element to this offense than what we've been used to seeing, and I think it could really make a difference in the Kyle Shanahan scheme, which I know is a bad word to a lot of people. I'm not a big fan of Mohamed Sanu at all. I think he's about the same as Leonard Hankerson. And I think if you give him really more than what we gave Hankerson, which was like a 1 year, I think it was a $1.1 million contract, then I think you're barking up the wrong tree. You're not going to get more production than what Hankerson. I mean, I guess Sanu might be able to stay healthy for 16 games, unlike Hankerson, but other than that, he's not really doing much. Benjamin's probably the one guy out of all these guys that the Falcons are connected to that will actually get me excited if the Falcons sign him. And not because I think he's going to come to Atlanta and, break records or anything like that, but just because he brings something unique to the Falcons, which is a vertical threat to put opposite Julio Jones. And I've been preaching for the Falcons to get more explosive on the outside for like 3 years now. And Benjamin's the closest, the first time in 3 years that the Falcons have really actually looked like they actually might do that. So that gets me a little bit excited. So he's probably, I wouldn't say he's number one on my wish list, but he is the guy that if we sign him, I'll probably give the two biggest thumbs up if we sign him.
I'd say my number one on the wish list is probably the most unique player out there in George Iloka. I feel like there's not a single player in the draft, in free agency, almost in the league, that's like George Iloka. I think there might be 3 guys like him in the entire NFL. And one of them's Cam Chancellor. Although I think Iloka's got more range and doesn't hit as hard, I do think he's a good football player and a hard hitter and could play the role. But pretty much I think that's the best, closest comparison in the scheme. Iloka is one of those guys. And then in Miami, there's a guy named Rashad Jones, who I think is right up there, same kind of guy, just doesn't have the length that Iloka or Chancellor have.
Yeah, Jones is a good player.
Jones is a friggin' great player. But when it comes to that kind of guy, you're looking at a big, strong safety that can make plays and knock people around, and they don't exist the way they used to. They really don't. I mean, most safeties in the NFL are these 5'10" to 6'1" guys, 200 pounds. Maybe you lay a little bit of wood, but whatever. Nah, you got Chancellor, who's the size of a linebacker, and you got Iloka, who's the size of a linebacker, and they just happen to also have a ton of range. And they completely change a defense. They really do, because I think Iloka, if you want someone who can go in there and man up against the Jimmy Grahams, the Ben Watsons, the tight ends that continually destroy the Falcons every single year, the Greg Olsons of the world, and you bring in George Iloka, I think that honestly, that solves a problem.
I don't disagree, Scott.
So, if you had a number one on my wish list, and I'm sure Parsons is sitting here like, yeah, he's number one on mine, and what's his name, Tyler, probably loves him too, but he's just a great football player. He's a great football player, and he's going to get overpaid for what the market's going to say that he is. Well, it's a supply and demand kind of situation. I would gladly give him $8 million a year to be the strong safety in the defense and give the Falcons someone who can actually stop a tight end for once.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. I don't have anything to add. I think you said it all. So speaking of the safeties, we've got a couple of articles, a couple of tweets from Vaughn McClure these last couple of days connecting the Falcons to Reggie Nelson, who's Iloka's teammate in Cincinnati. What are your thoughts on his fit in this scheme?
I don't mind Iloka. I don't mind Nelson. He's a solid football player. His age is what kind of pushes me away from him. For the money, I'd rather see the Falcons go out and get Deshaun Gibson than Reggie Nelson. Or hell, I'd rather see him go out and get Dwight Lowery for way less money and about the same player than Reggie Nelson.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about now, to me, Nelson probably fits better as a free safety in this scheme. If our strong safety is going to be asked to play in a box a lot, which Nelson can do, but I wouldn't sit there and say that that's what his primary role is. He's more of a sort of an interchangeable single high. You can drop him down in the slot, have him cover tight ends and wide receivers a little bit. I wouldn't say that's his greatest strength, but he can do it. And, I think his role is more akin to what we asked Ricardo out. I think you put him at free safety, he could be really, really good. Probably not long term, obviously, because of his age. He's going to be 32 or whatever, 32, 33 at some point in the near future. But for 1 year, I think he could do it really well and certainly help Ricardo Allen's development there. So it's a little interesting to me to hear when you see Vaughn McClure saying things like the Falcons are looking at him as a strong safety. And, not to suggest, Vaughn's pretty plugged in, so he knows what he's talking about. But it's just interesting that that's where, if that's true, then that's the way the Falcons are looking at him, which I wouldn't think at first glance looking at him.
Well, it could also be that they just really like Ricardo Allen.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because Vaughn also wrote an article last week saying that Allen and Threezy are supposed to compete for the starting job, which it doesn't seem like the Falcons are like 100% in on Ricardo Allen. It would seem, because there was that point in the middle of the season where it seemed like they benched Allen for that one game because he struggled a little bit, and then there was a time where he was basically on the bench for like a game or two, or splitting reps with Threezy. So it's just interesting to me. Like,
wasn't he injured during that time though? Like that's what came out later. Like he was injured during that time, and that's why he wasn't seeing those snaps.
See, I think there was a point, I can't remember because I blocked out so much of last season. But I thought there was a point, like maybe during that Titans game or whatever, that he wasn't, and that's what was weird about it. But like the next week, he was back back starting again. But I could be misremembering. But one other guy that I think is interesting, and he's a restricted free agent, so there's going to be absolutely nothing on him in the entire month of March because no restricted free agents ever really get signed until April, when because basically the deadline to sign those guys is the week before the draft, and no one ever really sniffs around them until then. Is Tony Jefferson with the Cardinals. He's one of those players that I think he can do a lot of the things that Nelson can do, which is going to be a jack of all trades sort of safety. And the Cardinals tendered him at the lowest level, and he's still young. And I was very surprised to see the Cardinals do that because I think he was their best safety last year. And they have Rashad Johnson, who's a free agent. And he's getting old, and Matthews more of a slot corner now, and Buchanan's more of a linebacker. So it's weird to me that they didn't do more to keep Jefferson. But if the Falcons aren't able to land Iloka or Nelson or somebody else, then I think come April, I think Jefferson is a guy that deserves a very, very, very long look at in an offer sheet from the Falcons to see if we can lure him away from Arizona.
If they haven't addressed safety at that point, I'd agree.
Yeah.
Because they use him as a free safety out in Arizona, but they've got a very interesting scheme. So I do like the idea of bringing in Tony Jefferson at least to compete for strong safety. But I think he would definitely beat out Ishmael pretty easily.
Yeah, I think so too.
And then Raphael Bush, for a name, he is out there and available.
Okay.
Just putting that out there. He's out there and available on a full free agent, unrestricted free agent contract. So that's a name that we saw connected with the Falcons in the past, and it wouldn't be shocking to see them come back,
Yeah. So let's move on. Let's move back to the offense. And we've seen the Falcons connected with a bunch of offensive linemen. We've seen a lot of talk about them being very active in their pursuit of Alex Mack. We've seen them connected with J.R. Sweezy. We've seen them connected with Mitchell Schwartz. Any of those guys you care to comment on, Scott? I know you have some very choice words about J.R. Sweezy.
J.R. Sweezy fucking blows. And that's all I gotta say about that guy. He's awful. That's just honesty. Alex Mack is the best center in the NFL, and Mitchell Schwartz might as well be their best right tackle in the NFL. And I think if the Falcons do try to end up getting both, Schwartz could be a situation where they sign him and then try and trade away Schrader for a third or fourth round pick, just for the 2 years of age that Schwartz would bring, and Schwartz is entering his prime. Mack plays center. Centers tend to last a lot longer than most positions. He was recovering from an injury last year, but he's still going to cost $10 million a year. Can pretty much guarantee that. And I'm okay with that. So I think it's a good fit for Atlanta to have Alex Mack. I think he'd really make the interior of the offense that much better. I don't think J.R. Sweezy gives you anything of substance, really. He's a good pull blocker. He's a guy that can move, but when push comes to shove, he's probably one of the worst pass blocking offensive guards in the NFL, if not the worst. In a one-on-one against any defensive tackle, I would be scared shitless if I was a quarterback and I knew he was protecting me. As a run blocker, he's okay. I'd say he's about league average as a run blocker, but the Falcons already have a guy who's better than Sweezy as a pass protector and about the same as a run blocker, who's going to cost about the same this year in Andy Levitre. You don't want two Andy Levitris on the roster. And I don't think he's any better. I don't think he's better than what Chester was. I don't think he's close to what Chester was as a whole. I don't think Sweezy's good. I don't see anything in his game. I don't see any refinement of technique. He's been in the league for 4 years. He should have had improvement in his technique from day one to now. He looks like the same fucking guy. Still has no idea what to do out there. Looks like a chicken with his head cut off and pass blocking. Doesn't know who to hit. Doesn't know what the hell he's doing. When he had Max Unger next to him, it made him look better as a pass blocker because Unger would help him with double teams pretty much every play. I can't. The thought that J.R. Sweezy would be trying to protect Matt Ryan is something that Falcons fans should be shitting themselves about if it comes to fruition. And I don't think it will. But it's awful. It's an awful thought.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think J.R. Sweezy's that great a player, but I just don't agree with you in sort of how bad you think he is. I don't think he's any worse than Chris Chester. I think they're the same player. I think it's just one, Sweezy's 5 years younger. But I think if you go back through Chris Chester's tape in Washington and you watch J.R. Sweezy's tape in Seattle, I don't think you're going to see a single scrap of difference. They both struggle against good deep tackles. Chester's probably a little bit more athletic, but Sweezy's probably more powerful, certainly more powerful at the point of attack. I think J.R. Sweezy's just a guy, but I don't think he's as bad as you think he is. I just don't.
If you have the choice between Sweezy or Wisniewski, or Sweezy or Boone, or Sweezy or Ted Larson, or Sweezy or Chris Chester, or Sweezy or Manny Ramirez, who was just cut. Not Ramirez wasn't cut. I'm thinking Luis Vasquez, or Evan Mathis, who's a free agent, or Jeff Allen. I mean, I'm just looking at who the free agents are. Brandon Brooks, Ramon Foster. Obviously, you can't get Kelechi Osemele because he just got signed by the Raiders. But, I mean, I'm just going down a list, and pretty much every guy I listed, I would, in a heartbeat, not even thinking about it, take over Sweezy.
Well,
there's like 3 guys that I'm like, I would take Sweezy over that guy. 3 guys. And I'm looking through it. It's like Lance Lewis. He sucks. Just going through Lance Lewis. Laurent Duvernay Tardif. That dude sucks. Jamarcus Webb. Because Jamarcus Webb shouldn't be in the NFL, period. Both the Eagles guards suck, but that's because they're the Eagles. And I'm just going through like Patrick Omame from the Bears. Michael Harris from the Vikings. So like 7 guys. 7 out of 64 are out of people who I would take over J.R. Sweezy. Notice 2 names I didn't list. Andy Levitre or Chris Chester. I would much rather have those 2 as the Falcons guards than have J.R. Sweezy anywhere close. I think the bigger issue there was center.
I agree with you. I'm not trying to sit here and advocate for J.R. Sweezy. I I think I just don't think the way you talked about him is fair to him. I don't think he's nearly as bad. I think he's an average. He's just a guy, but I don't, I think the way you talk about J.R. Sweezy is probably the way I would talk about Ted Larson. Ted Larson is terrible. But hey, it is what it is. I'm with you on Alex Mack. I'm for it. I don't really, most of your points I agree with on Alex Mack. I don't think his longevity is going to be as much as you think it is. I mean, it's possible he could play till he's like 35 or 36, but that doesn't happen that often in the NFL. It's basically like I would expect him to play 2, maybe 3 years, and then anything after that is just gravy. But honestly, by then you probably should be looking. Hopefully, you've drafted another center that you can probably replace him with and get hopefully that guy on the way up while Alex Mack is on the way down. So I think the issue is you're paying a premium, and I think you're basically trying to buy yourself 2 or 3 years to sort of before you can, basically 2 or 3 drafts to solidify your offensive line in the draft. Because I think with Mack, he's a 2 to 3 year stopgap. I think Levitri's a 1 year stopgap. I think Chester is probably a 1 year stopgap. Even a guy like Sweezy is just kind of on a year to year basis. And you're just basically buying yourself time so that you can draft some guards, some good centers over this year, next year, and the year after. And hopefully you can solidify your interior offensive line and potentially have, Jake Matthews and those 3 guys, and maybe if Ryan Schrader's still playing at a high level by that point, you have a really strong offensive line in front of Matt Ryan, at least during the final years of his time in Atlanta. So I think that's really the plan that the Falcons have to sort of have if they're going to spend the money on Alex Mack. They can't sign Alex Mack and think he's anything more than really a 3-year fix at most. Which I think is the case with all free agents. Like you really can't expect more than 2 or 3 good years from any free agent. If the Charles Woodsons, the Drew Breeses, those are like once in a generation type of free agent signings, and there's certainly nobody in this free agent class that's on that level. So that Hall of Fame level. So yeah. I mean, maybe Alex Mack, but he doesn't have. He's not in the prime of his career. So.
That's fair.
Now let's switch gears to the linebacker group.
I'm a fan of this linebacker group this year
because the Falcons are supposedly neck and neck with the Bears for Danny Trevathan. We've heard rumors early in the day that the Bears have thrown in an offer at Danny Trevathan. It sounded like, from what people were saying, it sounded like it was a done deal. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. So I guess we'll just have to keep our ear to the ground for the next 12 hours. See what else happens.
$9 million is what the Bears' offer was per year.
Yeah. So someone's probably Falcons got to swoop in and throw in a little bit more cash. In the meantime, the Falcons hosted James Laurinaitis today in Atlanta. We got a mailbag question about James Laurinaitis, so I'll ask that right now. Where is it? From Evan Birchfield, he says, if we sign Laurinaitis, where does he fit into our lineup?
There's a nice spot on the bench right next to Paul Warlow.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think Laurinaitis is basic. Like the player, the way I'll describe Laurinaitis is back in 2013 when we were all super high on Paul Warlow, we were hoping that he would grow into what Laurinaitis was. I don't think Laurinaitis is that guy anymore, which is a pretty solid, smart, tough, gritty middle linebacker that's not going to, win any 40-yard dashes or anything like that, but, gets the job done.
Year in, year out, 100 tackle, 3 sack, forcing some fumbles, picking up some fumbles, getting a pick or 2, knocking away some passes in the passing game, making some tackles for losses, just kind of doing a little bit of everything right in the middle of the defense kind of guy. Yeah, that's what I thought he would be.
Yeah. the thing about Laurinaitis is I don't think he's a bad player, but for all the Falcons' talk of getting faster and more physical, Laurinaitis doesn't really change that. He's a slightly better version of Paul Warlow. That's you're just basically you're going from a 3 to a 5 on a 10-point scale. That's basically what you're doing, which isn't going to do much. You want to get a 6 or a 7 at least, if not 9 or 10. So I don't really know why the Falcons are pursuing Laurinaitis. I think maybe they're just trying to get an idea of what the market is before they wanted to throw back up the dump truck of money to Danny Trevathan's house. I don't know.
I think if they back the dump truck up to Trevathan's house, the prospect of Laurinaitis coming to Atlanta is still possible for depth. Again, it all comes down to money. If he comes in and he wants to sign a 2-year deal for $3 million and be a depth guy in Atlanta and play special teams and all the other stuff, bring him in. What's the worst that can happen? He doesn't make the roster. No real loss there, I think it all depends on the money. And if fans got really pissed off about Laurinaitis being signed to a tiny contract like that, they really don't have their priorities straight. Jarrell Freeman has not been tied to the Falcons. I know Aaron's kind of sad about his cousin not wanting to come here. Some of these guys Atlanta shouldn't want, like Kelvin Shepard or Demario Davis, too slow. Albert McClellan, not a great fit. I do like Vincent Ray. I do like Craig Robertson. I think those guys are pretty solid. Sean Spence was probably in the wrong scheme. I like Zach Brown's speed, but I don't know how he's going to really fit in how he would really fit in Atlanta. Derek Johnson, too old. Joe Mays, bad fit. Rolando McClain is an interesting cat. I question if he'd be too close to home to really be effective. I think if he's too close to Alabama, he gets into trouble. The fact that he's in Dallas and it's like a 15-hour drive makes it tough. And then Shea McClellan, no. Just no. Audie Cole would be a nice value signing that could potentially be do some damage. He's a big guy, has some range. Looked really good in the preseason a couple years back and then kind of faded away because they drafted Eric Kendricks in the middle of that Minnesota defense. So there's guys out there. Outside linebackers, Nigel Bradham's pretty solid. Would love to see the Falcons make a run at Emmanuel Lamore. I think he's got good speed on him. Outside of that, there's like Chad Greenway if you want a value signing, Philip Wheeler if you want a value signing. The rest of it just sucks. Or it's signed, like Bruce Irvin.
Okay. I didn't hear you mention one other guy that I think would be a pretty good move is Tahir Whitehead. I think he's poor man's Danny Trevathan. So if you're going to pay $9 million a year to Danny Trevathan and pay, versus pay $4 or $5 million a year for Whitehead, I think those moves are kind of even. You're not getting as good a player with Whitehead, but you're getting a lot of the similar traits. And if you're playing, 50%, 50 cents on a dollar, then it's probably a better value. But obviously, if you want to get the best player, then go with Trevathan.
Whitehead's a free agent?
Yeah.
Well, that'd be helpful if I did some research on that.
Okay.
I didn't know he was a possibility. So.
Yeah. So I think if the Falcons get Trevathan, I think that would be a good move. Certainly, I wouldn't complain about it. He's a very good player. He'd be a great fit. He is the fast, physical, good in coverage sort of player that Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff were talking about when they were doing their combine pressers. He fits that to a T. So wouldn't be a problem if, and paying under $10 million for him, considering, the possibility that he could get more than that. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago predicting his contract, and I predicted him, I think, to be like $10.5 million a year. So if you can get him for $9 million a year, then that's relatively speaking, that's a bargain. So I wouldn't complain about it. All right. Now, Scott, let's talk a little bit about the pass rush. I know a lot of people are passionate about that. The Falcons haven't really been connected with anybody, and the two guys that they have, Tamba Hali and Bruce Irvin, both gone. Hali went back to the Chiefs. Irvin signed with the Raiders, which I predicted many months ago. But any other guys that you have your eyes on? I know you tweeted something about Nick Perry earlier today.
Yep. Nick Perry, very underrated guy. I think he was out of position with the Packers. He couldn't really do anything about it because he was on his rookie contract. So he tested out really well a couple years back on my formulas. I think I have him as one of my top guys. He's one of the few guys that broke 1 horsepower on my explosion formula, which is pretty insane. Because it's like only 20 guys all time have ever done that. We're talking Mario Williams, Khalil Mack. Let's see who else. Mario Williams, Khalil Mack, Kyle Vanden Bosch, Vernon Golston, Mark Anderson, DeMarcus Ware, Von Miller, Bud Dupree. Pretty beastly guys as far as athletes are concerned. Clowney busted it. And I want to say Chris Long beat it. No, I'm thinking Justin Houston. Sorry. I was on the wrong line.
That's a common mistake. Justin Houston, Chris Long.
And Nick Perry beat it. So, that's the final guy. He was so much better in college when he had his hand in the dirt, and then they pulled his hand out of the dirt, and he just went, you know what? I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And it showed. And I think if the Falcons went after him, said, hey, put your hand in the dirt, be the strong side end, this is what your job is, I think he'd take to it well, and I think he'd end up being a 5-6 sack guy and solid run defense, which from when you've got Tyson Jackson, who's a 0 sack guy and solid run defense, that's a massive upgrade. And if you can get him for $3 to $4 million a year after his prove it deal, it'll be worth it.
Okay.
That's one of those guys. Other pass rushers. Sorry, I got into my tangent. Olivier Vernon could very well be a guy the Falcons go after. Should the Dolphins pull the transition tag off of him? I hope they do, because I would love to see him here. Jared Crick would be a fun one. I think he could be a better fit as a strong side end that could actually pass rush. Again, someone who can pass rush and still play that end role would be great. Andre Branch is a free agent. I'd love to see Branch come to Atlanta. I don't think Jacksonville is going to keep him. Just a hunch here, if you will. Dante Fowler. I forget who else they signed. They signed so many guys this year. They got $90 million in cap. They got Malik Jackson. They got Dante Fowler last year. I mean, they got Audric. They got Smith. They don't really need him.
Yeah, there's they might go after Vernon. That's what I heard earlier today.
Yeah, and they might go after Vernon as well. So I mean, they really don't need Andre Branch. Branch knows the scheme. He's been there for 4 years. Quick guy, good fit. Again, bring him in Atlanta and do it for value. Jeremy Mincy wouldn't be a bad fit either. If anybody sends me anything about Greg Hardy, just don't. Again, Atlanta will take guys who have shown that they've rehabilitated their character. Greg Hardy is not that guy. until the dude gets legitimate psychiatric help and stops calling himself the friggin' Kraken, then no, he will not be in Atlanta. Robert Ayers would be interesting. I'd like to see Atlanta go after George Selvey for that O'Brien Schofield role. Vinny Curry re-signed, but he would have been great. I mean, there's not a lot of great guys out there. I'd like to see Adrian Claiborne re-signed. I know Aaron's mad on him, but I like him. I think he's a good fit. And then that's about it. I mean, there's just not a lot of great stuff out there for pass rush at this point. So it's basically Olivier Vernon or bust if you want a true impact guy right away, or you hope that Lawson falls to the Falcons in the draft.
Okay.
Or our boy Ugba, which I think that could be the interesting fit.
All right. I don't know. I don't think it's as dire. I know everybody wants that big splash pass rusher, but the reality is none of these pass rushers that are available this offseason are as good as their money indicates. They're all a bunch of six sack guys that are going to get paid like 10-sack guys. So the Falcons missing out on the Vernons and the Irvins and the Mario Williamses isn't really a big loss.
I really wish they could have gotten Derek Morgan last year.
He's another 6-sack guy. I'm like, if you're getting me a 6-sack guy, I'm just like, nothing wrong with a 6-sack guy, but it's just I can draft that, or I should be able to get that on the cheap. I'm not going to pay a premium for a 6-sack guy.
The reason why I like Derek Morgan is the contract that he signed is basically that of a 6-sack guy. That 4-year, $27 million contract.
Yeah, I don't feel like paying $7 million plus for a 6-sack guy. Yeah, it's just like whatever. I can get a free. I can get a first or second round pick that makes $1 million a year for the same thing. Like Shaq Lawson, Noah Spence, any of those guys. Any top 50 pass rusher should be that. So it's just not worth it for me. Chris Long, Robert Ayers it's gonna be interesting because Robert Ayers was rumored to be looking at like $8 or $9 million. I don't see him getting that, so I think he's gonna be one of those guys that may not get the big splash contract on the first day of free agency. So his asking price might go down a little bit. He can play that Michael Bennett role, play inside, outside, play the run, be a base, be a 3-down guy. It's just you got to get him at the right price because he's 30 now. All right. Scott, if you had to predict any of these guys that we talked about, if you were predicting anybody, who do you think if anybody, we're going to sign tomorrow?
I think Alex Mack and Danny Trevathan would be the two that I would feel most confident in predicting, but it's NFL free agency, so I can't guarantee. I can't be like, yeah, this guy's going to sign with the Falcons. Because honestly, Trevathan could very easily sign with the Bears. Matt could very easily say, you know what, Atlanta, go screw yourself. I'm going to go sign with Jacksonville or this team or that team. So I don't know. So.
Yeah, Mack's probably the guy I'd be most confident about, just because it sounds like the Falcons are backing up the dump truck to get him, and it doesn't sound like anybody else. Like the rumors were that Jacksonville's not really in that thought process, and maybe the Rams might be in the mix, but I haven't heard anybody else really talk about them being in that process. Benjamin is another guy that I'm hopeful, optimistic that the Falcons will land, but you keep hearing that they really like Mohamed Sanu, so you never know about that. Trevathan's kind of a coin toss between him and the Bears. I've sort of been thinking all along for most of today that he was going to wind up in Chicago, so I'm a little less confident that it's going to happen. So that makes me a little bit more optimistic that the Falcons can steal him away. But I'm not going to sit here and bet money on it. And Iloka, I'm just kind of waiting for the Vikings to sign him, just because, we're Falcon fans. We don't get the nice things that we want to get. So I'm not, I would love it if we did get him, but I'm not expecting it to happen. All right. So let's move ahead to the mailbag questions. We got a bunch.
You know what? I just want to put this out there. What if the Falcons' interest in Mohamed Sanu is more as a returner type / number 3, and we're reading it wrong?
Okay. Has he really returned anything?
Huh? Well, what if they really like Justin Hardy as the number 2, and Sanu's that third guy that comes in to try and burn a defense, and Hardy moves to the slot on third downs and 3 wide receiver sets? Just putting it out there. Just different train of thought. Maybe this is how they really like Sanu, as opposed to, hey, let's get Sanu to be the number 2 receiver, even though it's not going to work. And let's say they sign him for $3 to $4 million a year. I mean, if they sign him 3 years, $9 million, is it really that bad of a deal?
I mean, it wouldn't be terrible, but
I mean, it's the exact same deal that Devin Hester signed. Same structure, everything.
But who's as good as Hester is? Like, he doesn't do anything. Like, at least Hester's a great. Like, I'm looking at Sanu's college stats. He was a pretty abysmal punt returner at Rutgers. He's only really returned like maybe 2 kickoffs one kickoff in the pros for 2 yards. Like,
hands team.
I mean, like, he doesn't do anything. Like, the thing that he excels at is being like this sort of Cordell Stewart type. What Cordell Stewart was as a rookie, like as a slash player. That's the thing he's excels at, which is basically you drop 5 plays for him a week, which is, it's like the same thing as Devin McCluster. Like he's a Swiss Army knife type of player, but he doesn't, he's not like a great one. It's not like Percy Harvin type of Swiss Army knife. So that's why I'm like, even if you gave him a decent, modest contract, I'm like, well, why do you want him? Because he's just a body. Like, as a wide receiver, he's just a body as a returner. Like, if you just want a body, then go out and get Ruben Randall for on a 1-year minimum deal, and save yourself $6 million over the course of the next 3 years. It just I liked Sanu when he was at Rutgers. I thought he had potential, but he's just not that good. I mean, that's why Cincinnati's like not going to re-sign him. Doesn't even care about him. They've given him opportunity after opportunity to shine, and he hasn't done it. I don't know. It would just be very if we signed him, even on a decent contract. All right, let's move on to the mailbag. We have the first one from Evan Birchfield. He asked, "Do you think fan favorite Matt Bryant is our kicker next season?"
Yes.
I hope so. I mean, that would ruin my Wednesday if we find out he gets cut tomorrow. Because I think he's doing roster bonus.
$1 million in savings.
Did he do a roster bonus like this week?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I hope he is. I mean, I don't see why the Falcons. I mean, I guess I see why the Falcons would cut him. He's old and he didn't have a good season last year. But, given all the other issues his team has to deal with, I don't think going with an untested kicker is sort of the right move at the right time. Save that till 2017 or something.
I mean, if they get Shane Graham back, I mean, he hit the same amount, the same percentage that Bryant's basically been hitting since he got in Atlanta. His misses were from 40 to 49, just like Bryant's, and he hit 3 50-yard field goals for the Falcons. I mean, I'm just saying there's options out there that you don't have to pay $3.5 million for. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I get that. It's just Shane Graham's what, like the same, like maybe like 6 months younger than Matt Bryant. So I'm like, I don't know, just and he's basically been a journeyman for like the last 6 years. So do you really want to bail on Matt Bryant just to go with a journeyman like that? I just don't see the upside of doing it other than saving a couple $1 million, which I don't think the Falcons are really hurting for cap space. Like,
no, they're not
being able to make the moves that they need to make. So I don't know.
I mean, outside of like Josh Brown, and you'd pay a mint for Josh Brown, it's not really worth it to go out and get anybody anyway. So whatever.
I think we just answered the Falcon and Hawaii's question about Alex Mack. Smorgasburg9 has a question about us being linked to Irvin, but that's kind of moot now that he signed with the Raiders. So we'll skip that. Okay, we got one from Colin at Blog and Dirty. He says, would you be surprised if the Falcons don't address inside linebacker, strong safety, and wide receiver in free agency?
It all depends on what they do address. If they get Olivier Vernon, Alex Mack, and Ladarius Green, and a nose tackle like, say, Snacks, it makes sense. I mean, that make a ton of sense. But I mean, I think they're gonna hit probably all those. They may not hit them with like big names, but I think they will sign at least a body for those.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really surprises me with the Falcons. But yeah, I would be disappointed. I'd be very disappointed if they did not get at least a competent starting caliber player at all three of those spots. Like, not getting an inside linebacker basically means that they like Warlow as a starter, which is, psychotic at this point. Not getting a strong safety means that they like Kamal Ishmael way more than I do, which, isn't that big a surprise since, it's not that I dislike Kamal Ishmael, but I don't see him as a starter at all. And a wide receiver, like, I think that would be a little iffy to basically, you've already cut Roddy White. You're probably not, if you don't get a wide receiver in free agency, that probably means you're not cutting Devin Hester. So is Devin Hester going to be your number 3 until you draft somebody, and then you're going to draft a rookie? And, and you're going to have Eric Williams and Nick Williams be your other 2 receivers. It doesn't make sense to me. So, I would be surprised, very surprised, I guess, if they don't sign at least one body at wide receiver this offseason. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, Colin, I would be surprised. It would be a little perplexing to me if they did not get a decent player at all 3 of those positions. All right. The Falcon in Hawaii asks, what's your take on Sua Cravens coming to Atlanta, hopefully in the second round, if they don't get George Iloka in free agency?
Even if they do get George Iloka in free agency, if they haven't addressed weak side linebacker by the second round, give me Sua Cravens all day. I think he'd be a great fit in Atlanta. I think he's a good all-around linebacker. He tested with the linebackers. NFL teams basically say, hey, you're a linebacker. And he goes, all right, whatever. I will play wherever you want me to, NFL. You're going to sign my paycheck. And he tested about as even with a safety as he could. Just looking here right now, Cravens. I didn't even get testing numbers for him. But when it came to like actually going out there on the field, in the drills themselves, he looked very fluid as a linebacker. He looked really good in coverage. Looked good all throughout the offseason. Looked good all throughout the regular season. Like, I would love to have him in Atlanta. I think he's a great fit for the Falcons.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think Dustin is implying that Cravens would be a potential strong safety. I think Cravens is more natural as a strong safety in the scheme, but it seems like he's got his heart set on being a linebacker because what was it, like 236 or something at the combine?
He was 229 at the combine, but he's got the frame to add more weight if he really needs to.
Okay. I don't know. Like, I wouldn't be upset if we drafted Cravens in the second. I think that's where he needs to be picked in the second round. But he doesn't. I don't know. I'm not the world's biggest Sue Cravens fan. It's not that I think he's a bad player. It's like, all right, he's all right. He's fine. He's a good player. He's all right. But I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, man, I hope we draft Sue Cravens. Like, yeah, he's a guy. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Lost my place. Crandall McCrary asks, please tell me the Falcons are targeting Travis Benjamin over Sanu.
They're not. I don't think so, at least. I know that they've got interest in Benjamin. McClure's posted up that they've got interest in Benjamin. I do think that they will wind up with Mohamed Sanu in Atlanta. I pretty much that, if anything, would be the one I put money on. I just hope the contract there is not stupid.
Yeah, I can tell you, Crandall. Yeah, they are targeting. I don't really believe it if it makes you sleep better at night, though. To me, I don't think it's anywhere close in terms of those two guys as players. So it would be very odd to me if the Falcons looked at Sanu. Maybe they see something that I don't see. And maybe I should give this regime the benefit of the doubt because I thought they did a very good job for the most part in terms of their player evaluations last offseason, both in the draft and free agency. So I guess I should give them the benefit of the doubt, but it would be hard for me to understand how they can look at a player like Sanu and look at a player like Benjamin and think they're on the same plane as players.
Again, just throwing this out there, unless the money is that much different.
Fair enough. I just, I look at Sanu. Sanu's the type of guy that if I'm a team looking for a wide receiver, I would sign him in the second or third wave of free agency. I'm like, oh, yeah, Mohamed Sanu's still out there. Let's sign him. Like, I think that's where we got Hester. That's where we got, like, Josh Wilson and Dwight Lowry. Like, that's the type of player that he is. Where not the type of guy that you're talking about getting in those first day or two of free agency, which it seems like maybe might be the case. So that's the thing I question a little bit. I don't know. Okay, I think we answered Brandon Moorhead's question about who's the best fit at wide receiver earlier in the show. Ryan Jones asks, how often do teams cut a player and bring him back within a few days, like a number per year? This is referring to Charles Johnson basically getting cut by the Panthers and re-signing with them.
This is probably the first year that I've actually seen it happen ever. And the fact that I think 3 different guys did it. I think it was Tamahali, Charles Johnson, and one other. It was Tamahali, Charles Johnson. I swear there's one more. I'm trying to think of who it was, but it's very, very, very rare. Very rare.
I don't think it's that rare. Now, it's rare enough that I can't think of another example off the top of my head, but I do remember a couple of years ago somebody getting cut because they didn't take a pay cut, or a team was trying to avoid paying an option. Like I want to say like Maurice Jones-Drew or somebody like that got cut and resigned. It seems to happen like with one guy every off season, but I don't think it's that rare. Now, to me, it's a little rare to see a guy like Charles Johnson take a $3 million deal instead of taking $6 million from what other teams are offering him.
He wasn't offered six. He wasn't offered six. That's an agent trying to boost up numbers. That man was probably offered 4. So he said, between $4 million and $3 million, where do I want to go? I want to stay home. That's all that was. And he'll be back again next year in free agency. Maybe he comes somewhere else instead of where he's at. But
okay. All right. Derek Hunter asks, what do you think of Dominique Alexander from Oklahoma State at middle linebacker? I believe Dominique Alexander plays for Oklahoma. Boomer Sooner.
Does play for Oklahoma. Fast as hell. Not a huge fan of him as a middle linebacker. But I would love to have him in Atlanta.
I haven't seen as much of him as other guys on Oklahoma's defense, like Eric Stryker and them, but I have seen him in passing when I've been watching guys like Stryker and Charles Tapper and those type of guys. I sort of see him as like a 4th, 5th round sort of linebacker. I think he's a good downhill run defender, but he seems a little undersized and he's not particularly good in coverage from what I've seen. And that's not really a great combination when you're undersized and your play style, you're better suited to being a downhill guy, but you don't really have the size to be that type of guy. Because I think he's like 6'1", 230 or something like that. And you can't really play in coverage. So like he's a decent player, but to me he's kind of like basically what Demario Davis was in New York, which was a guy who started but wasn't really a good starter. So I think if you're drafting Dominique Alexander, you're drafting him more to be a quality depth guy, and then maybe in a couple of years you can plug him into the starting lineup and get a functional to above average starter. But I wouldn't draft him thinking he's going to start day one. I certainly wouldn't draft him thinking he's definitely going to start by the end of his rookie contract. So, basically he might wind up just being a special teams guy in the NFL and a quality backup.
Dominique Alexander?
Yeah.
I'm probably higher on him than you are. I like him. I just don't like him in the middle. I prefer him as a strong side linebacker, but the issue there is the Falcons already have a strong side linebacker. Honestly, out of the Oklahoma linebackers, I would much rather have Eric Stryker, personally, for what the Falcons run.
Okay. I think Alexander can play in the NFL. Don't get me wrong. I don't see him ever being an impact starter. Okay. Evan Birchfield asks, do you think it's better to overpay and fill a need or wait it out for the draft in hopes of filling it?
Don't ever overpay unless you're getting a guy who you believe will make multiple Pro Bowls for you. So if that guy is Danny Trevathan and you're overpaying and you're paying $9 million a year for 6 years and he makes it to 4 Pro Bowls and gets voted to first team All-Pro twice, that's a contract you're okay with. That's one that you look back and you go, that was worth it. Or a George Iloka who completely changes your defense. You put him in there and your defense goes from about 15, 16 where it is now to 7 or 8 just by putting him in there. Even if he never makes it to a Pro Bowl, his impact on your defense is worth that money. Because there are some guys out there who they will never make a Pro Bowl, but their impact on a defense is worth every penny. I don't think Cliff Avrill's made a single Pro Bowl in Seattle. I really don't. But I think he's been worth every penny, and I think he's part of what makes that defense click. Yeah, he's never been to a Pro Bowl. But I think he's a big reason why that defense clicks because of how well he rushes the passer. He gets 8-9 sacks a year. He creates a lot of pressure off the edge. He forces fumbles. He knocks balls away. He's not the guy that's going to earn the name. He's not the guy that's going to make millions of, the ridiculous contract. But he goes out there, does his job, and that defense is completely different from before when they had Averill in it. That Seattle defense before 2013, when they went out and got Averill and Bennett, was a completely different, much shittier defense in 2011 and 2012.
Yeah.
Because Jones and Chris Clemens aren't anywhere close to Averill and Bennett.
Yeah, I think you're hitting it on the nail on the head, Scott. It's free agency is not. You're not going to get Pro Bowl players. I mean, you look at there's like 1 million Pro Bowlers this past year, and you look at the list of them. Most of them, like probably 80 to 90% of them, were players that were drafted by their teams, and even the guys that were free agent signings, only really one or two of them actually got like a market level deal. Like Brent Grimes for the Dolphins, Malcolm Jenkins for the Eagles. Everybody else that was a free agent signing, like, Michael Bennett made the Pro Bowler, but he signed a real cheap deal in Seattle, and then they gave him money after he earned a big contract for that team. Most of these guys, you just like, I guess Peppers will count in Green Bay, Julius Peppers, like one of the best edge rushers in NFL history, or at least in the last 15 years. The rare sort of free agent signing that you can get. So I guess he's the outlier. And if you're talking about how you want to build a championship caliber team, it's always the draft. Overpaying in free agency doesn't do anything. If you're a team like the Broncos were a couple of years ago, when you already were in the Super Bowl, and then you go out and you sign guys like Aqib Talib and T.J. Ward and DeMarcus Ware, that's fine. You're already a Super Bowl team, right? You just try to get over the hump and win a Super Bowl as opposed to build up your team to be a Super Bowl caliber team. It's just one of those things where free agency is just not a way. Like the best free agent signings outside of the rare Drew Brees, Charles Woodson type deals are basically a Michael Turner type of deal, where you sign a player, you get 3 good years out of him, and what you need to do in order to make that a worthwhile move is you need to draft his replacement in that 3-year period. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why the Falcons screwed that up is because they didn't do that. They basically said, well, we'll just kind of keep going with Michael Turner. And then when they drafted a running back, they drafted Quiz Rogers. And, I'm a big fan of Quiz Rogers, but he was never going to be a starter, a feature back in this scheme when we drafted him. Maybe if we had been a zone blocking team, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe he could have been, 75% of what Devontae Freeman was this last year. But that's basically what you got to do when you're drafted, when you're signing these free agents. And that's what ends up happening. Like you look at Denver, they paid all that money for DeMarcus Ware. Like he got a 3-year, $30 million deal. I think the next year they used the number one pick or 2 years later, they used the number one pick on another pass rusher, Shane Ray, to replace him. It's one of those things where, like, if the Falcons go out and spend all this money on free agency, like people want to do, you have to draft their replacements within 3 or 4 years, or you're going to end up, shitting the bed, as we've seen the Falcons do in free agency. So it's just one of those things where people get all excited about the Falcons making these big splash moves on the first day of free agency, but teams that are out there spending money on the first day of free agency are bad teams. They're teams like the Raiders. They're teams like the Jaguars. They're teams like the Dolphins. And if the Falcons are going to be one of those teams, that tells you that they're a bad team. And free agency is just not a way that they're going to go from being a bad team to a good team. It's all about the draft. Free agency is just buying you time so that you can draft good players. That's all it is.
I think that's fair.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. Got a couple more questions in the last minute. Blogging Dirty asks, will the Falcons overpay for someone? In that same subject. If so, who and why? P.S. I already know Scott will say Iloka.
No, I mean, I think if the Falcons overpay someone, I think it's going to be Alex Mack. Just that's what all the reports are basically suggesting. They're going to overpay Alex Mack and give him $10 million a year. That's what the reports are. Now, if they were going to overpay for someone that I personally wanted, we would have probably Charles Johnson here in Atlanta for about $6 million a year. 29-year-old with 9 years of experience, played for Carolina, shown 10-sack potential his entire career, could play strong side end and still be a 10-sack guy at strong side end. You'd adjust the scheme slightly to where he plays a 6 instead of a 5 technique. But other than that, I mean, in a heartbeat, I would have paid that money for Charles Johnson.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think if we're going to put money down on anybody that's going to get overpaid, it's obviously Alex Mack. And as I just said, if we do that, then we need to draft a center. If not this year, then next year to replace him. Because that's the only way that you're going to solve that problem. You know, it's just one of those things where if you don't do that, if you don't have, you know, the Joe Hawley or the Todd McClure or the Chris Myers or whatever analog that you want to use, waiting in the wings at some point in the future when Alex Mack is 32, 33 and on a decline, you're setting yourself up for failure as the Falcons did with the running back position. And the example I just used, when they went out and then overpaid for Steven Jackson, you just keep compounding these problems and it's just dominoes. You know, they add up over time, and that's why you end up in these situations where you're trying to figure out, why are we only going 8-8 every year? Why can't we get out of this, mediocrity? That's what happens. So, I think Mack probably be the one guy that we overpay, if you can call it that. If we get Trevathan or Iloka, I don't necessarily know if that's really overpaying. But we'll have to see what those contract terms are. We'll see. Okay, Falcon in Hawaii asks, what's your take on Jonathan Bullard coming out of Florida and Atlanta getting him at number 17?
I have him as a late first-round grade. When I stack my board, Bullard stacks around 26. I wouldn't want him at 17, period. I wouldn't. Personally, if I had to pick a guy out of all of them at 17 that I would be okay with, that I think is still a little bit of a reach, it's Emmanuel Ogbah. But he still stacks in at 18 on my personal board, so I wouldn't be that against it. I don't think Jonathan Bullard at 17 makes sense. I think he's a strong side end. I don't think he brings anything really more to the table than what Babineau does. And I honestly think his best fit's probably a 3 technique in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think his best fit is a 3 technique. If you want to get the maximum ability out of him, it's a 3 technique. I think he can play strong side defensive end because that's what he did at Florida. He would play rundowns on a defensive end and kick inside on pass downs. But I don't think his upside as an end is that very high. I think he's, as an end, I think you're looking at a Chauncey Davis type of player. Good rotational guy, but not anything special. If he's going to turn into a good pro, I think it's going to be as an interior player. And I just don't see the value of the Falcons taking another 3 technique in the first round. Even a guy like Bullard who tested pretty well.
I probably don't like Kimdiche because he's like if you have Hageman and Babineau and Jarrett, what the hell does another 3 technique really bring?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like if we're getting like a Gerald McCoy type of player, then it's a different conversation. But there is no Gerald McCoy type of player in this draft, so even though people want to say Kimdiche is, but he's not.
No, not anywhere close.
It's just one of those things where, like, when we get to the draft, I haven't come close to stacking a board or anything like that. That won't happen until April 15th at the earliest for me. But I might be more amenable to it just because I might find out that the talent really isn't. There aren't 17 better players than Jonathan Bullard, but it's just one of those things where, like, right now I see him as a late 1, early 2, and if that's what you're taking at 17, especially at a position where you're kind of already okay at, where you don't really need another player. You can get by with who you got with Hageman and Jarrett and Babineau. It's kind of a reach for me, so I don't see the value of taking him at that. All right. Vin Cruz asks, why do we suck so bad in free agency?
It hasn't started yet.
Yeah, there you go, guys. It's not a big deal. It's okay.
I don't think free agency officially starts till what, 4 o'clock tomorrow? Is that what time it starts? Am I wrong here?
Yeah, no, I want to remind again. I sound like this cynical guy, but like people do understand that the first day of free agency is like the worst day that you want to win. Like, let me, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when the Ravens won the Super Bowl, you know what their 2 free agent signings were? They were Corey Graham and Sean Considine. Sean Considine is basically the equivalent of Sean Schillinger, and Corey Graham is basically the equivalent of 2012 Robert McClain, a really good nickel cornerback, but that's it. That's who they signed before the offseason before they won the Super Bowl. You know who the Denver Broncos' biggest free agent signing last year was? Owen Daniels. They just cut him today, right? They signed Vance Walker to a 2-year, $4 million deal. They signed Darian Stewart to a 2-year, $4 million deal. They signed Antonio Smith to a 1-year, $2 million deal. Like, good teams don't win the first day of free agency. I just want you to remind that. Like, if you're winning the first day of free agency, that means you're a bad team. So when you guys get upset that the Falcons aren't making all these great moves, at midnight, the day before free agency happens, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's like you got to keep your eyes on the prize. The draft is where it's at. Who cares what the Falcons do? Like, I want the Falcons to get some good free agents, don't get me wrong. But, like, at the end of the day, this team is only going to get better by drafting well. And that's going to take not only this year's draft, but next year's draft and the year. Like, you got to have the long-term viewpoint. So calm down. Like, it's not a big deal if the Falcons don't sign Bruce Irvin. It's not a big deal if the Falcons don't sign Danny Trevathan. It's okay, right? You got to keep your eye on the prize. It's fine. No need to have a cow. Don't slit your wrist just yet. Put the knife down. That's all I'll say.
Until 4 p.m. tomorrow. And even then, breathe.
There you go. All right, guys, that's our show tonight. Probably while we're sleeping, we'll hear some big news or something. I don't know. So this will probably be all outdated by tomorrow. But if you guys want to get ahead, I think we'll probably have some things to talk about on next week's show. So we won't be on hiatus again. So if you guys want to get your mailbag questions in, use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can tweet at the show at FalconsPFC. You can tweet at me or Scott. I'm at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. That's CARASIKS. For our listeners, not the people watching that can see the Twitter handle, be sure to subscribe and rate us on iTunes, Falcon Central Radio. Check us out on ProFootballCentral.com as well. We'll be back next week to talk about whatever moves that you guys are pulling your hair out tonight. Over.
Yeah, and please breathe.